So, Mr. Speaker, we're back in the House after what seems to be a long summer vacation for this Liberal government, and we still have a youth unemployment crisis, which got worse. We've got chaos in our immigration system, which got worse. The crime and the lawlessness in our streets, which got worse. And the Prime Minister promised Canadians a new direction, a change in leadership, whatever it was. And instead, they got the same ideas from the same old ministers and the same predictable platitudes, and frankly, coming up short on results. But before the Liberals took the summer off, I asked a question about Canadian housing. So I'm going to talk about the market for a second as we see what's going on in the summer. Buyers can't buy and sellers can't sell, and that should be indicative of a massive policy failure. If you want to own a home in Vancouver right now, it's going to cost you an average of 13.5 times your income. In Toronto, it's 10 times your income. At the same time, housing construction is down. It's down by 50% in the GTA, and it's down 13% right across the country. This is a government that promised us the most ambitious housing plan since World War II, but they're going to miss their targets this year by 50%. So it's easy to see how all of this is happening with the lofty rhetoric I think you hear isn't really lining up with what they're actually doing. The person put in charge of housing in this country raised home building taxes by 141% while he was in Vancouver as mayor, and he let home prices skyrocket by 149%. That was my question. He's rewarding the municipalities who are following in the footsteps of the generous handouts for cities that refuse to get new housing built. We've seen a continuation of that over the summer, and he's preserving the high-tax red tape bureaucracy in Ottawa that stops progress and keeps prices high. In fact, what they're doing, since I've asked this question, is building a $13 billion corporation led by a former NIMBY deputy mayor from Toronto who is responsible for keeping the private sector out of the tendering process in that city. And at the very same time, the immigration minister is opening the doors to this country, pulling out a rubber stamp and adding about 20% more to the cost of a home. So let's break down what this all means and why I asked my question, which wasn't answered. Forget owning a home. You need to own, in order to rent, you need to make $46 an hour just to rent an apartment in Vancouver, $42 an hour in Toronto. We know that most jobs aren't like that and don't pay that. And it means half of young Canadians will now spend over 50% of their income on housing. It means that the 27% of homeless Canadians are now over the age of 50. And so what all of that means is that nobody is immune to the 10 years of housing hell that this Liberal government has created. I really hope that the parliamentary secretary was in training camp this summer, because it's going to take a lot of flexibility and verbal gymnastics to explain why this failure was so big and why it's getting bigger.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canada is facing a housing crisis that demands bold action. That's why the Government of Canada has introduced the most ambitious housing plan in our country's history. This is a Team Canada moment when we must all come together and focus on what matters most for Canadians: housing, affordability, and a resilient economy. We're working closely with all levels of government, Indigenous partners, and the private sector to get the job done for Canadians. People across the country are struggling to pay their mortgages and rent and to keep up with the high cost of living. That's why our new government has moved forward with a middle-class tax reduction, like my colleague mentioned, that will provide tax relief for nearly 22 million Canadians, saving families up to $840 a year. It's why we're helping young families buy their first home by eliminating the GST for first-time home buyers. We need to build at scale quickly and bring down the cost for home builders. That's why we're working with municipalities to cut development charges in half for all multi-unit housing projects. Yesterday, the Prime Minister launched Build Canada Home, which will be responsible for building and financing affordable housing at scale. With an initial capital investment of $13 billion, it will catalyze a more productive home building industry and support more affordable housing option for low and middle income households. With that, we've also clarified the definition of affordable housing, making it based on income rather than based on median rent in the areas. We're going to do that with Canadian innovation, Canadian material, and Canadian workers. And we're going to continue building on the success of programs like the $4.4 billion Housing Accelerator Fund. Through this program, we've signed over 240 agreements with municipalities to cut red tape and increase housing density. That's what partnership is about. These actions are expected to support the construction of more than 750,000 new homes over the next decade. Finally, our government is taking action to grow and protect the supply of rental housing. We've removed the GST on new purpose-built rental buildings and committed more than $24 billion in loans to build almost 65,000 units through the Apartment Construction Loan Program. The federal government is using every tool at our disposal to lead transformative change in Canada's housing system and to make sure that every Canadian can find a home that meets their need and their budget. We're taking action. We're there for Canadian. We hope the opposition can support us. Thank you.
For Thornhill.
Speaker, the parliamentary secretary admitted one thing, which I agree with, that Canada is facing a housing crisis, that her colleagues and the minister that she's here for actually juiced with 141% of more taxes. They talk and talk and talk, and there's no action because this is exactly what had happened before. I'm not sure what it is about a technocratic central banker that always has them building a new bureaucracy, trying to convince people that more steps or more offices or more appointments is going to somehow speed things up and do it cheaper. If she is really serious about fixing what her government already broke, and we'll give her the opportunity now, since the minister won't answer the question, would she agree to make GST off of all homes that is $1.3 million and get rid of the capital gains and actually incentivize municipalities? She can answer that question right now.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing and Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Canadians are facing a housing crisis that touches every corner of this country. That's why our government has launched a comprehensive housing plan, the most ambitious in our history, the most ambitious since the Second World War. We're working in partnership with provinces, territories, municipalities, Indigenous communities, private sector. We've spent all summer talking to industry. Actually, we've been talking to industry since last year to better understand how we can do this more quickly. We've spent all summer engaging with stakeholders to make sure that what we are putting forward in Build Canada Home is flexible and can address the crisis that we are facing. We're reducing barriers to construction, investing in new housing programs. We're supporting first-time home buyers, like I said earlier, with the GST rebate. And we are launched Build Canada Home to accelerate the pace of home building and build affordable housing at scale. We're here for Canadians. Thank you, Mr. Speakers.